Hello everybody, the FPS Tester here, and today we're going to be benchmarking the i7-4790K with the GTX 1650. So we'll start with 1080p, and we're going to be using ultra low settings first, native resolution, and everything else turned off in the features. I do want to quickly note that I am playing the game on an SSD using a dual PC setup so that I'm not losing any FPS during this benchmark, and I've also got 16GB of DDR3 RAM installed. And if you want a more detailed specification of the parts that I'm using for this, look in the description, they're all there for you. But without further ado, let's continue. So this is 1080p ultra low native resolution. It doesn't look very good, and for me, I'm playing at 1440p, so playing at 1080p on a 1440p monitor always looks drastically worse than if you were natively playing at 1080p on your own monitor. So it looks like at low settings at native resolution, we are getting GPU bound for the most part. Sometimes the FPS does drop and the GPU usage does drop, so that's definitely a CPU issue there. VRAM is practically maxed out, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we're eating up some of our actual RAM because we are maxing out on VRAM. Just going to run around a little bit to make my CPU work a little bit more. And CPU usage is at about 50-53%, but don't be fooled by that, as you'll see later when I lower the settings even more with FSR, that the CPU usage gets to about 60% before basically becoming the bottleneck in the system. I think this is enough of checking out the low settings without FSR, and it clearly is GPU bound most of the time. Let's go ahead and change our graphics. We're going to come down here. We're going to keep on ultra low for now. Texture resolution is on ultra. So you know what? Before we actually do that, let's change that to low. We'll see how much of an impact this has on VRAM usage, because it was on ultra textures, which, ooh, I can tell you instantly the game looks drastically worse. Let's go ahead and actually start counting the FPS again. So VRAM usage absolutely did drop. We're getting around 70 FPS. The game looks significantly worse, I can already tell. Like, it looks a lot more like Play-Doh. And our RAM usage is at 13.5 gigs, and I'm keeping note of that. So if I go ahead and switch that back up, if I go ahead and switch this back up to ultra, will my RAM usage increase? Because if my RAM usage increases, that does mean we are eating into our RAM for the actual game textures to be increased. 13.6. No, we're not. No. Ultra textures is fine. We have enough VRAM for ultra textures, it looks like, at 1080p. So yeah, you can have your textures on ultra with a 4GB graphics card, clearly. It's not eating into our RAM. Now, we'll quickly go ahead and turn on FSR so you can see how much performance you'll get, or how much FPS you can get from the i7-4790K without factoring in the performance limitations of the GTX 1650. So this next test is purely going to be for the CPU, and the way we're going to achieve this is I could either lower the resolution in the game or I can turn on FSR. I'm going to choose to turn on FSR. That is the AA, that is not the dynamic resolution. Right, FSR 3.0, we'll use 3.0. We won't bother with 1.0, it looks a lot worse. We'll turn this to ultra performance. This is going to look dreadful, but it's going to allow us to see just how much FPS we'll get from the CPU itself. Right, so we'll count our FPS again. And yep, don't pay too much attention to how the game actually looks. It's not the purpose of this particular part of the benchmark. This is just to look at the CPU usage and just to see how much FPS we will get from the CPU. So as you can see, GPU is at 60%, so we're absolutely not limited now by that. And the CPU didn't really increase that much. It's still sitting around 55 to 60%. Our FPS is sitting around 70, high 60s, dropping into the 60s in this more denser part of the forest. We'll just keep walking around a little bit. We have been dropping some FPS, but I've not felt it. I cannot feel that 40, 43, 1% lows. Basically, I'm not feeling, it's not feeling stuttery, it's not feeling bad. It feels really smooth, to be honest. You can expect to see still around 60, mid 60s, low 70s, basically from this CPU. You're not going to get much more than that, regardless of what GPU you have. You are going to be completely limited by the CPU itself at the mid 60s to low 70s by the looks of it for the most part. But overall gameplay feels smooth. And this is 60 FPS roughly, and I'm somebody who plays at 144 Hz. So then if you're playing at 60 FPS, this is going to feel 60 Hertz rather. In my opinion, it will feel smooth. We're now going to try out balanced, because this is what the game recommended to me when I started, was actually balanced on medium settings. I won't go as far as to try medium. We'll try low with balanced FSR 3.0. We'll see how this looks. Now, I know some of you are going to be like, balanced FSR with 1080p, that's not what you should be doing. But FSR 3.0 is significantly better than what we had previously. So now we are playing on balanced FSR with low settings. And as you can see, the GPU usage definitely went up from the previous test. The game looks significantly better. And the GPU is still not completely used. So we'll actually bump that up even more. Why not? Well, we've got two options. We can either turn the quality preset up or turn the FSR down. I'm going to choose to turn the quality preset to medium. And see how this looks, and we'll see how it performs. Oh wow, that is night and day difference in terms of how that looks. Holy crap. That looks way different than low. This is definitely... Oh wait, maybe it was just a shadow. Oh, okay. Yeah, I got lied to. It was just an overcast of clouds. I really thought we were onto something there. But I'll tell you what we're onto. We're onto a GPU bottleneck. That's right, we're on 50 FPS. And I'm going to start counting my FPS again, get the averages correct, right? This definitely does not feel as smooth. I can feel the jitteriness of this. You can see there from the frame time graph, it's kind of all over the place at times. I can definitely feel that I'm hitting the 40s. It does not feel so good, you could say. I can definitely feel that I'm in the 40 FPS range, let's put it that way. I know I've dropped. Usually I can get away with playing games at around 50, 55 FPS if it's a slower pace survival type game. But no, I can definitely feel this. It's not exactly awful, but it's not smooth. You know what I mean? You're gonna always be able to feel this. I felt that FPS drop there. This is nowhere near as smooth. So I think we're kind of pushing it here at medium with balanced FSR. We'll try low, and I'll tweak some of these settings manually. Okay, so these are the settings that I've come up with. I've been tweaking around for a few minutes to try and get something that looks better, but also that has pretty consistent FPS above 60. So this is kind of what I've come up with so far. It's not perfect, but you can do more tweaking on your own, you know, for your own setup. So I started off with all medium settings, started lowering some gradually. So what we have are these settings. I'm not going to go through every single one. You can have a look, right? We got FSR unbalanced. You could increase that to quality if you wanted to, or even lower it. You know, it's personal preference. As you can see, with the settings, the game looks a bit more filled out. Shadows, a bit, you know, the trees look a bit more filled out. It looks a bit more like a forest. The ground still is pretty bare, but there's not a whole lot you can do about that without turning some of the settings up really high. But as you can see, there is little bits of grass that go quite far out, so it does look a bit more filled in. There's some stuff on the ground as well. And, you know, the forest is quite a bit darker in the trees, so it doesn't look awful. It's not amazing by any means. But as I walk around here, we'll start counting our FPS again because, you know, I need to reset that every time I change preset, ideally. So when we're inside the forest, we're getting mid-50s, low 50s, certainly better than dropping into the 40s, right? Which we might still drop into the 40s. So we're at high 50s right now, that's pretty good. We are, honestly, CPU bound most of the time right now, it would seem. There is a little bit more leeway in terms of GPU usage, but I've found that turning up some of the settings to use my GPU to its full potential results in a lot of FPS drops and so on in certain situations because there's, you know, they're intensive areas. And so I'll start dropping some frames in specific situations I've noticed. But keeping it to, that was a huge spike. That was a huge spike. But as you can see, FPS drops quite wildly when you're near a larger base. Now this is not a huge base, but it is somewhat of a large base. Let me go and pick him up. So yeah, for Sons of the Forest, I would probably use a mix between low and medium with FSR, on balanced or quality or performance. Really depends on what you're willing to accept in terms of how it looks. But you'll see roughly anywhere from the high 40s to the low 70s with an Intel Core i7 4790K with a GTX 1650. Obviously, if you have another GPU, your FPS will vary wildly, but the i7 4790K will get you around 50 to 70 FPS depending on the situation. For the most part, you will have some dips in performance sometimes, but that's just the nature of it, unfortunately. Before we leave, just out of pure curiosity, why don't we turn everything to ultra? We're going to still have FSR on balance, because why not? We're not going to turn any of these on. Let's just apply it. Let's just see how... Whew! Well, the game looks significantly better. It still looks bad for me, because it's 1080p on a 1440p monitor, as I keep saying. But it certainly looks way better. And my FPS is around 30. And to no surprise, it's clearly GPU bound. But one thing to take away from this is, if you have a more powerful GPU, you can play Sons of the Forest at around 50 to 70 FPS with the i7. Or if you have an i7 but you don't have a very good GPU, you could upgrade GPU and still see around 50 to 70 FPS in Sons of the Forest. So it is possible to play this game with a very pleasant experience with this CPU. You just need a more powerful GPU than this one to get better looking graphics, of course. But it is possible, which I think is pretty cool for such an old CPU. It's around 11 or 12 years old at this point, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, and also the RAM usage with 16 gigs of RAM seems to be okay, but there's really not a lot of headroom. So if you wanted to record or stream, you may struggle because of the RAM. But yeah, that's been Sons of the Forest. I've been the FPS Tester. Thanks for watching the video. Do let me know what you think about a commentary type video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.